This conference will now be recorded.
Good morning, folks. As you can see, this is the coffee conversation for technology, cyber IT, and GDPR. We will start within about 1 or 2 minutes. So hang tight with us. Thank you. All right, then. Good morning. I'm Suzanne Brown, Vice President, Public Affairs and Communications with the Longview Chamber of Commerce. Thank you so much for joining our coffee conversation as we're looking at technology, specifically into the world of cyber IT and information privacy. First, to let you know, this coffee conversation is being recorded and will be made available online at longviewchamber.com. For those on the line, you will receive an email later today with a link to listen again. And I'd encourage you to share those with other businesses in East Texas. Second, there are a couple of features I would like to make you aware of. If you do not see the title screen, look to your toolbar for an orange flower-like icon. Next, find the microphone and camera icons at the bottom of your screen. We would like for this to be an interactive roundtable forum. So if possible, have your mic or phone and camera available. We ask that you remain muted until the discussion portion of the meeting or until you're ready to ask questions. Finally, there is a chat feature on the right side menu. The purpose of the chat today is to get a message to our webinar production manager, Stephanie Rodales, so that she can be aware of any issues with the broadcast and the message will go to her only. We would like to take the opportunity to thank the sponsors that make this program possible. This discussion is presented by Starfish Ad Age. And we wish to thank our continuing advocacy sponsors, the presenting sponsor AEP SWEPCO, the gold sponsors Austin Bank, Republic Services, Spring Hill State Bank, and Starfish Ad Age. The Longview Chamber is creating these coffee conversations for education and awareness for our member investors and to update our public policies on technology. We're convening public policy members and our business member investors with experts from the field and from policy. We create an environment of discussion and learning to prepare updated policies in which our chamber uses as a foundation to act on behalf of the business community. Today, we have several guest speakers that we are really excited to be hosting. From the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, we have Matthew Eggars, Jordan Crenshaw, and Evangelos Razis. We also have Bill Mack of the Secret Service, Longview Police Department Cyber Unit Detective Jordan Oexman, and Abel Sanchez, CEO of Starfish Ad Age. And we have Mark Robinson, External Affairs Manager for AEP SWEPCO. He's also a Chamber Board member and Chair of our Public Policy Committee. At this time, I'd like to turn this over to Bill Mack, Detective Oexman, and Abel Sanchez for a brief local perspective.
Thank you, Suzanne, and thank you for inviting us. I am, like Suzanne said, I'm from the Secret Service. I work specifically in the Tyler office. I'm the agent in charge here, and we're responsible for East Texas, which includes the Longview area. So I'll give a quick brief overview of what we do here in Texas so you understand what our mission is here and why you're hearing from somebody that you think would be normally protecting the president or something like that. But our mission in financial crime started at the beginning for us. We were founded in 1865 specifically to combat counterfeit U.S. currency. We still do that today, but over the years our mission expanded into things like bank fraud and wire fraud, all in a sense meant to protect the nation's financial infrastructure. Over the years, our mission expanded again into cyber and computer crimes, and we force several federal statutes related to those types of crimes. These are things like network intrusions or things like cyber-enabled crimes, which include a lot of internet scams, credit card skimming, which Detective Oexman will talk about in a little bit, and so forth. We operate a task force here in the area. It initially was part of the North Texas Financial Crimes Task Force, which was a partnership of state, local, and federal law enforcement to combat financial crimes in the area. We recently merged that into the Dallas Electronic Crimes Task Force, and we now have created what we call the North Texas Cyber Fraud Task Force. The reason it's important for us is the Electronic Crimes Task Force, it was a group of not just local, state, federal, and local law enforcement, also the private sector and academia. And that was a partnership that really advanced our mission. It was even mandated. It existed for many years before 9/11, but it was mandated by the Patriot Act. And now we have a lot of those resources available to us here in East Texas. So that's certainly a good thing. And that is about 2 to 3 weeks old. So that's relatively new. We also operate, another thing important for East Texas is the Secret Service operates the National Computer Forensics Institute. This is a facility in Alabama. It's a partnership with the state of Alabama, in where we fund and conduct training for state and local, strictly state and local law enforcement officers in things like digital forensics and digital investigations, meant, as well as local prosecutors and judges, meant to give local law enforcement the tools that they need to conduct electronic and technology crimes that would normally be maybe difficult for them to be able to obtain. We work very closely with agencies in your area, Longview, where you have a strong partnership with Longview Police Department. Detective Oexman is a member of our task force, and we've sent multiple personnel from his department to the National Computer Forensics Institute. We also work closely with a lot of the agencies in the area. We also have members in Smith County that are on the task force, as well as others. We work closely with the Gray County Sheriff's Office, and we have strong partnerships there. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I'm going to go in a little bit later into some of the more details of some of the stuff we deal with here in East Texas, but I'll let Detective Oexman talk a little bit more about what he does here.
Good morning. Jordan Oexman with the Longview, Texas Police Department. I've been with the police department for 7 years now. I've been in CID for coming up on 3 years. I primarily investigate financial crimes in the Longview area. Like Bill Mack said, I am on the U.S. Secret Service Cyber Fraud Task Force, and I do various things for them. And I guess I'll get into later in the meeting what I primarily work on and some of the skimmer, gas pump skimmers that I do for them.
Hello, everyone. My name is Abel Sanchez. I am the CEO of Starfish Ad Age. We are a digital marketing agency in Longview, Texas. We have clients all over the U.S. Our primary focus is in programmatic advertising. And one of the things that we focus on and why GDPR and Cpra hits home for us is because we happen to have clients in California. So CCPA is a little bit different than the GDPR. So I'm not sure if I should get into too much of this information because it's quite a bit. But there's a couple of things that are happening in the digital world right now that is impacting how advertisers and how consumers are obviously obtaining their advertisement. And one of the things that is significant right now, not just with CCPA, but primarily what has happened in the last several months, there has been a new ballot or a new regulation that's going to go on the ballot in November, which is the Cpra, the California Privacy Rights Act. And one of the reasons why this is so significant to the advertising industry is because it's going to target behavioral targeting, unlike the California Protection Act, the Consumer Protection Act. That's completely different. But one of the things that's significant about this particular law is that if it passes, it's going to also create the California Privacy Protection Agency. So there's a big difference between behavioral targeting and then obviously with contextual targeting. And I will get into that a little bit later during this discussion.
Thank you so much for that. I'm going to turn this over now to Matthew Eggars of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, joined by Jordan Crenshaw and Evangelos Razis.
Suzanne, thank you very much. Matthew Eggars here with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. So I work in our cyber intelligence and supply chain security division. It's kind of the home for our work on things related to cyber security and security and trade facilitation, let's say, of goods and services across borders. I'm going to quickly turn things to my colleague Jordan Crenshaw and Evangelos to talk about privacy. I understand you guys are looking at the kinds of things you may want to advocate to your state government, and I think a good place always to be thinking about in this time is privacy and things related to cyber. So I'm going to turn things over to Jordan to talk about his in-depth work on privacy domestically, and then we'll go from there. So Jordan, if I may, I'll turn things over to you, sir.
Thank you, Matt, and thanks for having us today. Apologies, I do have to jump off around 11:25, so I apologize for the hard stop. But my name is Jordan Crenshaw. I'm Executive Director of the Chamber's Technology Engagement Center, so I lead policy on the tech front domestically, but also directly manage our privacy working group at the Chamber that has over 270 member companies and trade associations. Data privacy is incredibly important to us. We support a national data privacy standard. We're incredibly concerned about a patchwork of state laws that will make it difficult for businesses to comply. Privacy laws fundamentally impact core business models, whether or not it be retail brick and mortar shops to the biggest tech companies. So it's not just big tech or digital advertising that is threatened by a patchwork of state laws. Abel talked about the California Consumer Privacy Act and the current ballot initiative. If you actually look at the current California law, and that's before all the new mandates come into effect, it's estimated by the Attorney General's study that it will cost the state of California and their companies $55 billion to comply just with CCPA, and $50,000 for companies with 20 or fewer employees. That's without the new ballot initiative. That's without other states imposing their own potentially conflicting privacy laws. And that's also not taking into account lost revenue. We endorse the idea of a national privacy law. The Chamber put out model privacy legislation back last year at the beginning, back in February of 2019. We think consumers should have the right to opt out of data sharing, the right to have data deleted, the right to know how data is used, collected, and shared. But at the same time, we also think that there should be a balance enabling innovation and companies to offer innovative products and services. And we're currently looking at a few bills on Capitol Hill. I don't anticipate we'll see privacy legislation passed next year, but Senator Wicker has put out a bill that provides some preemption, does not have a private right of action, which is a threat to many member companies. We have seen Senator Cantwell, on the other hand, propose bills that would open up, I think, the floodgates in terms of litigation. At the same time, we've also identified over 26 states that have gotten into the game and have considered privacy legislation either through a study or legislation in the last year. Texas is one that's attempting to do a commission to figure out what it wanted to do with data privacy for the next legislative session. Due to COVID-19, things have slowed down on that front. So a lot of the effort really has been this year on the domestic side. States are doing some work on data privacy with regard to COVID, and we've also seen some COVID-19 federal proposals as well. Some of those proposals, I think, would harm the ability of companies to return to work, as it would expose them to lawsuits for keeping data about the workplace. But that's generally in a nutshell where we've been, and happy to take any questions.
Jordan, I've got a question for you. We did talk, so you talked about the upcoming 87th legislative session in Texas looking at our own privacy laws. So you talked about our national laws, and obviously some of the states already have their own privacy laws. What's the benefits that we have currently in our public policy? We currently advocate for Texas to have its own privacy laws. What's your thought on that? Is that a benefit? Is it better to have just one national? Or what's your thoughts on that?
I think it's better for us to have one national privacy law because it would make it easier for companies to comply. In many instances, some of these states are actually proposing their own laws, which will contradict each other in some ways. We've seen Washington State. California is actually the only state with really a comprehensive privacy law at this time. Washington State has gotten very close twice to passing a bill. I anticipate we'll probably see a handful of states between 5 and 10 in the next legislative session pass laws. The problem is once we start engaging in getting legislation out there, it either begins to change or diverges from what we've seen in other states. And that's the concern, is that because privacy so fundamentally impacts core business decisions, that it's our concern seeing states take up their own legislation. So that's where the U.S. Chamber is on that.
Thank you.
Other questions for Jordan?
Let me maybe ask if Evangelos is with us and see if he wants to weigh in on some of the related GDPR issues while we've got you too. Evangelos, how are you seeing GDPR, and how does that maybe influence or maybe could shape how folks in Texas think about privacy at the state level?
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. Just confirming. Yes. Well, happy to talk about that. I think just a little bit of background. So, while sort of Jordan is keeping up the good fight here at home and at a federal level regarding data privacy, the Chamber has for many years been engaged in international data privacy debates. In the past 5 years, we've been engaged in over 50 jurisdictions on ensuring that, data privacy laws enable companies to access markets and innovate using data across borders. I think many of the themes around, what Jordan just said around the need not to have a patchwork, that same dynamic is replicated at a global level. We want companies to be able to operate across different jurisdictions without having to think, prohibitively high sort of investments in compliance that will prevent them from market access. In fact, I think one way to think about this in the international level is that privacy laws are often used as barriers to trade in other jurisdictions. We've seen this in the European Union with GDPR in terms of how they regulate cross-border data flows. We've seen this in jurisdictions such as India, which would put in place a data privacy law that would make it very difficult for U.S. small and medium-sized enterprises to access the Indian market. But that is sort of all around the world that we've seen in terms of sort of at least at a macro level dynamics around privacy and access for American businesses to those markets. Now, with regards to what we can learn from GDPR in the U.S., I think there are sort of it's important to think not only in terms of building a specific law on privacy, but also to think about implementation, being able to ensure that whether it is an attorney general or a data protection authority, that efficient compliance and risk-based approach to enforcing data privacy obligations is sort of the approach taken. I can give you several examples of how in Europe, in fact, many sort of the provisions within even GDPR are interpreted in different ways, in non-risk-based ways that, result in, enforcement against companies that are, are not inflicting sort of any privacy harms on consumers, but are being hit with fines and injunctions because, their local data protection authority is, not as innovative. Or not, interprets GDPR in a manner that is more constrictive on data. So I think, at a high level, it's important that, whatever future data privacy regime is being contemplated, that, enables companies to operate across multiple jurisdictions, whether that's at the state level or internationally, and that, you keep in mind when you do implement these laws, that they enable companies to continue to innovate and access markets.
Evangelos, thanks. I guess, Suzanne, if I may, I'll just see if anybody has questions before these gents need to depart. Although
Evangelos, I've got a question on that one, Matthew, if you're okay with that. So we pride ourselves in having several global entities here in Longview and the surrounding areas. Also, with any good website, anybody's global, right? So it's the World Wide Web. So when you talk about enforcement of the GDPR, specifically in the European area, is there any potential impact to our local businesses if we're not doing things right? Have we seen, you talked about enforcement, is there any way that we could get caught up in some kind of an actionable impact to our local businesses if they enforce GDPR on one of our local websites? How does that work? Is there some kind of a fining mechanism, or is there, you just get kicked off of their programs? How does that work?
Yeah, so in short, yes. I think that there's a threshold that GDPR has with regard to the amount of European personal data that you're either targeting with your business operations, or in terms of the sort of the amount of European data you're processing. I mean, there's a few ways that would trigger it. Either in terms of the territorial scope, because it is important to know that GDPR is an extraterritorial law. So the requirements for said law follow the data and sort of your business models that target European personal data. Now, in terms of the findings, in short, if you fall under GDPR, you can be fined one of two ways. You can either be fined if you fall out of compliance with it, or found to fall out of compliance with it. Either if you have an office, that is located in the European Union, you can be fined there by your local DPA if you have designated them your lead authority. Otherwise, if you do not have an office in the European Union, the data subject in question, who is bringing a complaint to the Data Protection Authority, they can go to their local DPA and then they can bring enforcement action against you, resulting in fines depending on the severity of it, up to 4% of global turnover.
That's a great answer. Thank you. Have we been seeing any of that impacting businesses here in the United States?
So yes, I would say that many of the targets of DPAs tend to be larger American companies, but that is not exclusive. And I think moving forward, there's certainly an appetite for greater enforcement of GDPR. Keep in mind that the law has only been in place for 2 years. I think much of the guidance needed to DPAs are putting out in order to enforce the law effectively, at least in their eyes, has been put out or is currently being put out. So I really see the scope of the companies that DPAs are targeting to be expanding, not decreasing as we move forward.
I mentioned, and from a standpoint, let's say a local business starts to say somebody from comes to the local business, stays at a hotel. That hotel takes the information, email address, so on and so forth, maybe creates a geo, and then in turn, when that individual goes back home to Europe, if they're targeted there, are they subject to the GDPR? They're going to be in some way, shape, or form impacted by that if they're targeting that consumer, correct?
Sorry, could you repeat the first half of your question? Just 'cause I heard a little bit of feedback.
Okay, so let's say for an example, you have an individual that comes in from Europe, stays at one of the local hotels. That hotel in turn takes her email information, and then of course they geo-fence that location. So when that individual goes back home to Europe and they start to get targeted by that brand home, are they subject to GDPR guidelines and laws as far as getting fined for them not being able to have a legal basis for collecting that data?
So I think when in doubt, I would check with legal counsel on this. You know, from my understanding, in many cases there are ways. You know, if it's an incidental or you know, if you're not necessarily targeting European data subjects, then you may not be triggered by GDPR. You know, I do have to give the caveat that I'm not an attorney, and you know, I think you should when in doubt, check with counsel. But when it comes to the sort of, you know, if you have a European visitor coming to Texas, you know, with regard to handling that data, there might be certain derogations within the law that you can avail yourself in terms of, you know, finding an appropriate legal basis for processing that data.
Evangelos, thanks. I think you may need to depart, so I will help you there. Suzanne, how would you like to proceed? I'm happy to turn things back to you.
Yeah, thank you both to Jordan and Evangelos so much. I know that you guys have a hard stop at about 10:25, 11:25 your time. So thank you so very much for being on the call this morning, part of this webinar to help us look particularly at national and international issues and policy. Would like to now transition this back over to that local perspective, and let's take a more in-depth look about the Longview trade area in general.
I can talk a little bit about what we see in terms of the vulnerabilities that businesses have and what we often see that happen to them in this area. There are two, when it comes to cybercrime, there are two common cybercrimes that we see most often here, and that the first one is business email compromise, and the second one is ransomware. I think the business email compromise is one that we see much more, and I consider it to be one of the most significant, if not the most significant threat to small, mid-sized businesses here in East Texas. And what this crime is, we call it BECs for short. And these crimes usually start with social engineering, spear phishing, something like that. And basically, the fraudster's goal is to usually infiltrate your email system. Once they're in their email system, they could spend days, weeks, months developing intel about messages going back and forth. And they basically try to get a sense of how you're moving your money to and from your vendors or others. And they basically, what they want to do is they want to find a way to divert some of those bigger payments to their own accounts that they've set up for the purpose of laundering money throughout their infrastructure that they've set up. So what happens is often there are two companies involved. There's the company that's been infiltrated, and then there's the victim. And the victim, one of the hard parts about being a victim is you don't necessarily detect any type of intrusion or anything, because it's actually somebody else that's already been hit in that part. But basically what happens is the typical way this occurs is you would get an email, or somebody in your company would get an email saying, okay, you know, you have payment XYZ coming up. Can you please send it to this account this time instead of the other one? And one of the reasons why people fall for this is a few. One is that it's coming from a legit email address that they're expecting to receive, or somebody has spoofed or mimicked an email address. And this would include something like, instead of Bill, BILL at gmail.com, you may get an email address from BI11 at gmail.com. So we'll do tricks like that to make things look similar. We see victims, some of these are payroll, intended at hitting payroll. So somebody in your company may get an email saying, okay, divert XYZ's payroll is now changed to this account. or could be going after $1 million movements and payments of money. So we've seen anything from $1,000-$2,000 amounts into 7 figures in terms of losses for companies associated with this. Now, what can you do if you think you've been a victim of one of these? Time is of the essence in these types of situations. If something has occurred, we need to hear very quickly. We've developed a process with other agencies and FinCEN, which is the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, part of the Department of Treasury. And we have a process called the BEC kill chain. And if we get a call about one of these, we put that kill chain process, we implement that, and the goal is to try to recover as much of those funds as we can. If we are able to start that process within the first 24 hours of the transfer occurring, then I believe the recovery rate is somewhere in the area, and I don't recall the exact figure, but it's over 50%. It's somewhere around 75%. Once it gets to be 72 hours, it's a dramatic shift down into the single digits. The chances of being able to recover something after 72 hours is almost nothing. And one of the reasons that is because usually at that point, the money's somewhere where we can't get to it overseas, in a place that we can't money return, or it's been converted at some point in the line into a form that we just can't get to, like cryptocurrency or cash, something like that. Now, how to prevent this? A couple of big things is, obviously the cybersecurity protocols that you have in place are important. The process that you use are important. The technical aspects are, but lots of times this is a weakness of a lack of employee awareness. That basically your employees fall for phishing emails, people trying to extract information over the phone, so on and so forth. And that's often what the weakness ends up being. And that's for the company that's been infiltrated, or maybe their email system has been infiltrated. On the flip side, what you also need to do is verification is very important. I always say verify, verify, verify. You have to have process in place that if you do receive a request to change something, that simple email probably should not be it. You probably should have some other type of way of confirming or verifying that. And the best way is probably to pick up the phone and call somebody at your counterparty that's making that payment, and not call the number that's in the email that you got, because that's the bad guys know that you might do that, so they're waiting for you to try to call there. But look up the number on Google if you don't already have it. Call somebody you know there, and just make sure that request is legitimate. But I would say that every time that I've heard of one of these being stopped from a company here in East Texas that's been almost a victim of this is because their employee caught it and realized something was amiss, and that's often how it was stopped. Because after that, once that money goes back, you're relying on your bank and us, and we will do our best to do it. But as time goes by, it's going to be harder. And if the scammers are moving fast, they're going to get this money out. They create these vast money laundering networks to move this money, break it up into smaller and smaller pieces. That just makes it harder and harder for us to recover. The second thing I'll talk about is ransomware. It's not as common as BECs in this area, but we do see it. And again, social engineering and spear phishing are often the where these things start. And lots of times it's somebody clicking on a link, and then you are downloading some software. You don't even know it's coming until it's there, and once it pops up on your screen, you're out, you're locked out. And then you'll probably start having communications from the fraudsters in terms of what they want to do in order for you to get out. So it's technically more difficult than a BEC crime, although it works a lot faster, and it certainly can be more devastating depending on your network and how big it is and how much it affects, and so on and so forth. This is something also you need to call us ASAP. And when I say us, I'm talking about law enforcement in general, but particularly you can call the Secret Service or any member of our task force. And once we get your call, we'll need something that your IT personnel are important for us to be able to talk to, because we'll need some technical information from them. And then our initial goal will be to try to see if we can figure out a way to defeat that ransomware on your system, possibly before you having to divert to a backup or take some other action. and that is often not effective. Sometimes it is. Kind of depends on a variety of factors. But if we're able to do it, then we will certainly do what we can. We don't suggest or advocate in any way paying the ransom. That's a decision that you have that a business has to make. But the pitfalls there are a couple issues are, it's going to embolden these scammers to do it again. In addition, it's going to send out a message to at least a certain extent that you're willing to plan, and if you're a victim, you're willing to fund getting out of that if you view that as an option. Having backups are very important, but not only having backups are very important, but having a plan in place to be able to work that backup into your system, because we do see instances where a network is backed up, but there's no plan to do it, and it can be a complicated thing, and sometimes so complicated that businesses don't want to do it. So they do things that we generally advise against. Also talk a little bit about COVID fraud. This is something that we've seen a huge amount of. It's somewhat exploded here in East Texas and nationwide. Every disaster, we always see a certain amount of fraud associated with the programs associated with that. Horizon, oil spill, hurricanes, earthquakes, any type of disaster that results in government money being used, there's going to be a certain level of fraud. But this one, the difference here is this is nationwide, so the scope is much larger, and we've seen quite a bit of it. And it's mostly been related to programs and people either making false applications or being duped into making applications or being duped into moving money around on behalf of people who have filed false applications. But it's something that we're still kind of get wrapped around. It's still new. It's changing every day. And Detective Oexman knows well, because we've all been inundated with this, and our task force is working hard against it. Haven't seen a ton affect small businesses per se yet, but it's definitely something to be aware of, and be aware of people trying to take advantage of the situation to potentially scam you. And that's all I have about my specific part.
Thank you so much. I know you did this last year. You came out and spoke about the businesses that are compromised and how that was exploding in Texas in this area last year. So thank you for that update. I appreciate that. Matthew, did you have something, sir?
I did. I was going to mention one of the first times we were down in Longview talking with you all about cyber. I remember hearing, I think, probably for the first small business level, folks having difficulty with ransomware attacks. That was probably maybe even 4 or 5 years ago now, Suzanne. I don't think that's going to go away anytime soon. Bill, I think what might be useful, I think folks may know this, but law enforcement has a lot of difficulty sometimes when monies kind of get overseas, and your ability to cooperate with some countries is better. At least their cooperation, I should say, with us is probably a little bit more forthcoming than some. And I guess in short, what distinguishes one kind of country's cooperation from another, if I may? And then if I could, maybe Suzanne, I'll touch on the Ohio law, SB 220, that might be worth flagging for folks. So, Bill, your thoughts on countries?
Yeah, so we kind of have two ways that we approach a country in terms of our cooperation with them. There are some formal things in place. So we have some partnerships with other countries through things like Europol and Interpol, and there's some other programs, especially in Europe and some other places that we do take advantage of in terms of cooperating and working with other agencies, obviously both ways in terms of them requesting it from us and us the other way. And the kill chain process specifically is often, takes advantage of those formal processes in order to try to see what we can do in terms of recovering funds for victims of BEC crimes. Then there's also our kind of informal ways that we cooperate with our agencies. We have offices overseas. We have about, I'm not sure the number off the top of my head, it's about 15 or so international offices. And those offices often have contacts locally. They have people that they cooperate and they go to. So we take advantage of both when we can. Some nations are their policies, their procedures, they just choose not to cooperate with us. Some it's more even a case-by-case basis. Some certain things, maybe some countries will work with us on, some they won't. But we take advantage of the opportunities and the contacts that we have to try to advance our mission when we can. And it is often fruitful, but not always.
Bill, thanks. I think one of the things we try to tell our members is having those relationships, obviously, with law enforcement folks like Bill before that bad day happened. So picking up the call and saying, hey, what do we do now? I think eases the burden.
Mm-hmm.
Suzanne, if it helps you guys, should I touch on the Ohio bill?
Yes, definitely, because that's one of the things that we had brought up in some original discussions. Would you?
Please. So why is the Ohio bill significant? So if you're talking to your state legislature, the Ohio bill is significant because it's the first time we've seen the U.S. Chamber a bill at the state level that really tries to drive what I would call, and I think of as kind of a new model for cyber and data protection, right? Data security, cybersecurity, data protection, all this stuff in the real world kind of fits together. But the reason why I say it's a new model and we're really very supportive of it is because it combines kind of two things, right? You kind of think of that teeter-totter. You've got a call for a program. You've got a push for businesses to have a cyber program that's documented, it's tangible. On the other hand, there's an incentive. You get an affirmative defense, what I would call probably liability protection light. If there is a breach of, let's say, your network systems, a tort suit would be brought against your entity. This is in Ohio. And if you can show, hey, I'm a business and I'm using one of a number of industry recognized programs, or I am already regulated under certain, let's say, federal laws like HIPAA, GLBA, certain entities may be compliant with FISMA, which really more or less applies to government agencies, or the Healthcare Centered Act, the HITECH Act. You have affirmative defense. You could say, hey, in a court, not so fast. I'm doing all the things that policymakers, cyber experts ask me to do. You get some kind of safe harbor. We'd like to see that at the federal level, and I'm going to come back to that in a second. But one of the things you guys could think about, just as a point of discussion, is the Ohio bill became law in 2018. I don't know how many groups across the U.S. are aware of it. I'm not sure, to be honest. I don't follow the state level policy and laws and outcomes as closely as I do at the federal level. I'm not sure it's been utilized, but it's a good model. The one where you've got a call for a program, you got to show that you are you've created a program and you are up to speed with one of a number of about 10 plus programs, and you get an affirmative defense. We want to see that at the federal level. Another aspect of this that I think is really key is at the federal level, at least, we're always kind of trying to push back on new cyber programs where an agency or a bill would establish a brand new program. So companies are always kind of chasing so many different programs. One of the key aspects of this, in addition to the affirmative defense, is it allows a company to choose from an array of programs that it might already be using, including, let's say, a PCI, payment card industry standard, or maybe the cyber framework. So we like that menu of options approach. because we're not going to get away from policymakers wanting to have new cyber programs or data protection programs. It allows them to select. I will stop there, but I would probably notice for the first time we've seen at the federal level, probably not surprisingly, Senator Portman of Ohio has put forward a draft bill that I'm happy to share that piggybacks on the Ohio approach, documented program. If you have a suit brought against you, a tort suit, you can show, hey, I'm doing all the things folks asked me to do. I get an affirmative defense. It's the first time we've seen it at the federal level, but still at the state level, something like the Ohio bill might be useful. I'll finish there.
Matt, quick question. Do you feel like that, so we're looking at federal legislation, is that the appropriate place for that, or is there additional protections that could be layered if you utilize the state legislation as well on top of that?
You know, I probably want to give it more thought with folks that are familiar with the lay of the land in Texas, but my thinking is this: is getting legislation done these days at the federal level is really difficult. And some days that may be a good thing, because typically we see a lot more problematic bills at the federal level than we do see good bills, to be quite frank. But I do think that I think we will eventually see something like the Portman bill pass. It just may take, 3-5+ years, maybe 7 years. Heck, it took us to get a good information sharing bill done. We started around 2011 and we weren't finished until about late 2015. So things can take a while. And then obviously you're going to have maybe a change in the administration, maybe a different Senate. So things are really potentially in flux. But I would say, hey, if you do have, let's say, a state legislature that's wanting to become more prescriptive vis-a-vis Texas businesses around cyber, it's always good to discuss options, have tools in your negotiation toolkit. Ohio SB 220 might be a good jumping off point.
Thank you.
Hey, Suzanne, I'd like to jump in and kind of briefly talk about what we see from a marketing standpoint in regards to privacy and data. One of the biggest challenges that we see in regards to the data protection and Cpra is we, as an industry, do believe that there should be one law across the entire US versus having multiple in different states and everyone having their own, simply because if you are working and if you're a brand that works with multiple states, then from an advertising standpoint, it becomes very difficult for you to try to follow each one of those laws. But one of the things that brands can do right now, and this is really interesting because when you look at your own website, most websites, the owners of those websites or the web developers don't even have a privacy policy in place on their own website. And it's extremely important for you to disclose that information as to how you're collecting that data. And especially with everything that is happening in California, because I believe that California is going to end up, if it goes nationwide, that is going to be the framework moving forward. And one of the impactful and significant pieces of it is going to be what's happening in November, which is the California Privacy Rights Act. And one of the things about that specific piece of law has to do with the behavioral targeting. And a lot of people don't understand that most individuals and most brands understand that cookies are always, everyone knows what a cookie is, but those cookies are not the only way of how information is collected on an individual or users. You probably have gone to a website and just because of sheer convenience, you have the ability to log in using Google or Facebook. That's one way of collecting data. Other ways is, let's say you go to the New York Times and you want to continue reading the information, but in order for you to continue reading that information, you have to sign up or plug in your email address so that way it unlocks the rest of that content. There's other ways of location-based, there's apps, pixel placement, And one of the newest, and it's not necessarily new, but it's been around and it's gaining a lot of momentum, especially because of COVID, is smart TVs. So many people have been obviously at home, quarantined, and with the smart TVs, obviously everything that you're doing on there is creating some kind of pattern of a behavior of what you are or who you are as an individual based on, let's, for an example, Netflix. You can have multiple accounts, dad, mom, kids, grandparents, whatever. That creates a behavior of that specific individual. And on top of that, one of the reasons why the one of the reasons why the Cpra is really significant is because it's targeting directly at behavior, which right now, that's probably 90% of how people are targeted, is based on a particular audience pool digitally, regardless of what channel you're on. It's not just about cookies anymore. And it's funny because the person and the individual that actually spearheaded this particular initiative for the CCPA, his name is Alistair McTaggart, and he actually, it's a funny story if you don't know the story, but he's a real estate investor in California, and they were having a party, and a couple of Google engineers were at that party, and he was having a conversation about privacy. And it just so happens that he asked them, how much do you know about me? And it must have been the alcohol, but they basically told him that, hey, we know more about you than you think, and it's scary. So that really just triggered him, and that's where all of this started coming into play. But one of the significant pieces about these two is how impactful it's going to be to the advertising, industry, period, because there's two different ways of looking at this. You've got your behavioral targeting, and this has to do with the fact that you walk into a specific location or a geofence, and it picks up your device ID, it picks up anything that you're doing within that time frame. It also picks up how frequent you are at that location. So if you kind of think about, and if you have seen your privacy or your inside your mobile device, if you have an Apple phone, you can see every location that you've been on, and it collects all of that information. Well, that information is used obviously for targeting, but it creates a pattern in an audience pool. Another way of targeting, which is contextual targeting, and this is one piece of a tactic that is used that may not be as hurt because of this law, but it's still going to impact it regardless. And that's obviously the contextual is, if you don't know what contextual is let's say you are on a website for real estate, for an example, and you happen to start getting ads for other real estate companies or vacation homes. That's basically your contextual targeting. So one of the things that we tell our clients whenever we talk to them and start building websites for them is always start with privacy by design. So always think about putting together an entire framework from your website, starting with privacy and how you are going to allow the individuals to opt out of the of any kind of targeting. So just because you're using pixels from other major platforms like Google or Facebook doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to protect you. Yes, there are some language that you can put on there, but at the same time, obviously, I'll talk to your attorney, but at the end of the day, put a privacy on there, policy on your own website. It's super important, and don't sit back and allow the platforms to just basically, have the privacy for themselves, because they're only going to protect themselves at the end of the day. And a lot of people don't really realize this, but the moment that you pull a retargeting pixel from either Facebook or from Google for Google Analytics to kind of see what kind of traffic you're getting within your website, it's super important that you understand what you're opting into and how you're going to be able to put that language in your privacy policy. And it's important to just go ahead and update it. We've seen some privacy policies from 2016, and they're old. So there's a ton of different avenues that you can go to, that you can obviously pay for the privacy policy. That's probably would be your best bet for somebody who doesn't understand and what they need to have in that disclaimer on their own websites. So.
Just real quick, this is Jordan Oexman, Longview Police. I had to call in. Seems we're having some internet issues.
Thank you. And Abel, thank you for that in-depth look. I appreciate that. And Detective, I'm glad that you said something. It's one of the things, we're getting close to time to wrap up, but one of the things that I wanted to look at again, and with you, Bill, as well, is, and I know that a lot of our businesses have already established relationships with our cyber unit and that partnership, if you will, with Secret Service, but talk to us again about the importance of companies creating those partnerships ahead of time so that if there is any type of a cyber issue that occurs, that they have that established relationship, that they've got a policy procedure in place to activate to minimize any kind of damage to their organization.
Yeah, well, I will first by saying that if you know, by calling you know, Jordan and his unit and other members of our task force, we're in constant communication. So you don't, if you don't necessarily know or feel like you have the ability to call our office, which we're certainly, we take all our calls, we're certainly very accessible, but you can go certainly to a member of our task force and you know, they have access to the resources that we would normally deploy anyway. So developing those relationships with any one of us is as effective as, rather than, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to do with our office per se, but just having an understanding of who you need to call and when you need to call them, being able to pick the phone up right away and knowing what you need to be able to say, it definitely makes things easier and more efficient for us in terms of getting what we need to get out. So learning on our website of what you need to look out for and what you need to be aware of is important. And you know, if people have questions or have issues beforehand, or if they suspect something and they're not sure, please call us. I know that lots of times companies have their own internal policies and procedures that need to go through certain steps of verifying before they do that. But just keep in mind, the more steps that you employ in that part of it, the longer it's going to take before you can call us in certain situations that you may need to call us as soon as possible. So that's always something to be aware of. Sometimes there ends up being so much red tape in the beginning that it slows you down to the point where you're not able to call us in time. And then once it's too late, you know, unfortunately, there's a lot that we can't do. That doesn't mean we won't do anything. We'll still conduct an investigation and still try to, you know, locate and identify suspects. But the sooner that we can start doing that, the much more successful we're likely to be.
Very good. Mark, any additional questions, sir?
Oh, so many questions and so little time. You know, we did have some questions about the 5G impact on a community. I know that there's some security concerns around that technology, Internet of Things. It's kind of created a new landscape, and you know, the hackability. It talks about kind of how 5G and Internet of Things hackability is like 76% higher than non-IoT. So we don't have time to get into it, but maybe that's a future conversation. To me, it's important to know not only what do we have to have, like what Abel was saying about having things on our website, but also as we look to develop more infrastructure in our communities, what kind of infrastructure should we be looking at? And then what are the risks associated with the improved, or at least thought to be improved, services like 5G? Because with those, sometimes there comes additional risks as well. So that's not a question, it's just a statement of what I'd love to see us having a conversation going forward. Thank you to everybody that was participating on the call today. Good conversation.
Excellent. Well, folks, we're at 10:57. Matthew, any closing comments, sir?
No, thanks again, as always, Suzanne, for having me and my colleagues from the U.S. Chamber. Yeah, one thing I might just note is IoT was brought up. The Ohio bill provides a model that can apply equally to devices. There's a California law that's prescriptive in nature. And if folks bring up, hey, data security or IoT, the Ohio model where you've got a kind of a call for a program plus affirmative defenses or some kind of liability protection, I think is easily doable. That's something also we want to do at the federal level. And you're right, Mark, we could spend a lot of time on 5G, and there's a lot of focus at the federal level, and I'm even sure at the state level on the security of supply chains and so forth. You can't pick up a newspaper or look at your computer without some kind of story about supply chains, China, Huawei, what have you. It's a big, big topic. But anyway, I'll finish there. Suzanne, thanks for having me.
Oh, it's our pleasure. It is always a pleasure to have these folks. Matthew made mention we have been in partnership on doing cyber summits for a number of years now, and it's been wonderful to have these relationships with our U.S. Chamber of Commerce, with Matthew, his colleagues, with the Secret Service. We've had the FBI and Homeland Security in the past as well, the Longview Police Department, pulling in Abel Sanchez. It's a pleasure to have you with us this morning and have these robust conversations and looking into the future and looking at how we are going to shape our policy. So Matthew Eggars, thank you. Jordan Crenshaw, Evangelos Razis from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, Bill Mack of the Secret Service, thank you. Longview Police Department Cyber Unit Detective Jordan Oexman, Abel Sanchez, the CEO of Starfish Ad Age, Mark Robinson, our External Affairs Manager for AEP SWEPCO, who also is a board member here at the Chamber and chair of our Public Policy Committee. We thank you to our participants. I'm running out of my pronunciations. We thank you to our participants for taking time from your busy schedule to provide us with the latest updates on cyber issue and information privacy. One of the roles that your chamber plays is to help create an economic environment that allows prosperity to occur. Together we will be stronger, and we will come through this rocky period stronger than ever before. So stay tuned for more webinars. Again, on behalf of the Longview Chamber, we appreciate your participation. Just as a reminder, the webinar is being recorded and will be made available at longviewchamber.com, our website. For those on the line, you will receive an email later today with a link to listen to this webinar recording again. Again, thank you for being with us today. Take care and stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.